What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're talking about one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in all of human history. A man who rose from nothing to conquer Europe, who rewrote laws, crowned himself emperor, and whose ambition ultimately destroyed him. I'm talking, of course, about Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, you might think you know Napoleon. Short guy, big hat, hand tucked in his coat, right? Wrong on the short guy part, by the way. That was British propaganda. Napoleon was actually average height for his time. But that's just one of many myths surrounding this legendary figure. So who is Napoleon really? Let's start at the beginning. He was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica, which had just become French territory. His family wasn't nobility. They were minor Italian nobility who had fallen on hard times. Napoleon was the second of 8 children, and he grew up speaking Italian, not French. He didn't even learn French properly until he was a teenager. Young Napoleon wasn't particularly popular. He was short-tempered, awkward, and fiercely ambitious. He got into a military academy in France, where he was bullied relentlessly for his Corsican accent and his poor French. But he didn't care. He buried himself in books. He read history, philosophy, military strategy. He knew he was destined for something great. And then came the French Revolution. Suddenly, the world was turned upside down. The old rules were gone. A young, ambitious military officer could rise quickly if he was smart and ruthless enough. And Napoleon was both. In 1793, a young Napoleon was just a captain. Then he was put in charge of artillery at the Siege of Toulon. He devised a brilliant plan that forced the British fleet to withdraw. Within weeks, he was promoted to brigadier general. He was only 24. From there, Napoleon's rise was meteoric. In 1796, he was given command of the French army in Italy. The army was ragged, starving, and demoralized. But Napoleon inspired them. He promised them glory and riches. He marched them over the Alps and smashed the Austrians in a series of brilliant battles. He seized territory, forced peace treaties, and sent back to France so much loot that the government was stunned. He was no longer just a general. He was a hero. In 1799, Napoleon returned to France. The revolutionary government was a mess. Corrupt, ineffective, and hated by the people. Napoleon saw his moment. He staged a coup, overthrew the government, and established himself as first consul. He was the most powerful man in France. He was only 30 years old. Now, here's where things get interesting. Napoleon wasn't just a conqueror. He was one of the greatest administrators in history. He created the Napoleonic Code, which reformed the chaotic French legal system into a single unified set of laws. This code guaranteed religious freedom, equality before the law, and the protection of property rights. It influenced legal systems all over the world, from Europe to Latin America. He also created the Bank of France, stabilized the economy, and established a centralized education system. For all his flaws, Napoleon gave France stability and order. In 1804, Napoleon decided he wasn't just a consul anymore. He wanted to be emperor. He basically crowned himself. In an incredibly dramatic ceremony, he snatched the crown from the Pope and placed it on his own head. He was sending a message. His power came from his own achievements, not from God or any church. As emperor, Napoleon set out to conquer Europe. And for a while, he was unstoppable. In 1805, he destroyed the Austrian and Russian armies at the Battle of Austerlitz. It's considered one of the greatest military victories in history. He forced Austria to surrender, humiliated Prussia, and made Russia sign a peace treaty. By 1807, Napoleon controlled the largest empire Europe had seen since the Romans. But the thing about Napoleon is he never knew when to stop. He was obsessed with power and conquest. He invaded Spain and got bogged down in a brutal guerrilla war. The Spanish fought back fiercely, and Napoleon lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers in what he called his Spanish ulcer. Then came his greatest mistake. In 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia. He marched a massive army of over 500,000 men into Russia, expecting a quick victory. But the Russians didn't fight him. They retreated, burning everything as they went. They burned their own crops, their own villages, leaving nothing for Napoleon's army. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, he found the city empty and ablaze. The Russians had set fire to their own capital. Napoleon waited for the Tsar to surrender. The surrender never came. The Russian winter arrived, and Napoleon had no choice but to retreat. The retreat from Moscow was catastrophic. Freezing temperatures, starvation, and constant attacks from Russian forces decimated his army. Of the 500,000 men who marched into Russia, fewer than 100,000 returned. Napoleon's enemies smelled blood. Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Britain formed a coalition against him. In 1813, they defeated him at the Battle of Leipzig, forcing him to retreat back to France. By 1814, the coalition armies had invaded France and captured Paris. Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the tiny island of Elba in the Mediterranean. But he wasn't done. In 1815, Napoleon escaped from Elba, landed in France, and marched on Paris. The army sent to stop him instead rallied to him. He was emperor again. And the European powers, terrified that he was back, formed another coalition. Napoleon decided to strike first. He marched into Belgium to defeat the British and Prussian armies before they could join forces. At the Battle of Waterloo, Napoleon faced the British under the Duke of Wellington. The battle was intense. Napoleon nearly won. But the Prussian army arrived just in time to reinforce the British, and Napoleon's forces were crushed. It was over. Napoleon was exiled again, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic. He died there in 1821 at the age of 51. The exact cause of his death remains a mystery. Some say stomach cancer, others suspect poisoning. So, what's Napoleon's legacy? He was a visionary who reshaped Europe. He spread the ideals of the French Revolution, equality before the law, religious tolerance, the end of feudalism. But he was also a tyrant who suppressed dissent, installed his relatives as puppet kings across Europe, and caused the deaths of millions. He told his generals, "The greatest crime in war is to lose." And he lost in the end. Napoleon is a reminder that ambition is a double-edged sword. It can lift you to incredible heights, but it can also consume you. He never knew when enough was enough. He could have stopped after Austerlitz and gone down in history as a great reformer. But he kept pushing, and in the end, he lost everything. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe for more history content. Let me know in the comments, do you think Napoleon was a hero or a villain? I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll see you in the next one.